What's going on, guys? We've got a lot to jump into this morning, so we're just going to kick this off. This is going to be a post regarding the client-side authoritative accusations against the New World devs. They've come back and clarified a lot of the details, and this is going to be just information for you guys. I'd love to know your thoughts as we continue down this road called New World. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive right into the post. We've got the official kickoff, and we've got a couple of other threads that we're going to cover in here, especially other software engineers are responding. Honestly, I think this is really just great information to have and hold. So, like I said, let's have some fun with this one and dive right in. The community manager responds, "Hi, everyone. There's a recent bug in New World that drove some speculation on how our simulation works. The bug was addressed quickly, but both the speculation and the bug deserve some clarity and explanation. New World is not client authoritative. From a simulation standpoint, New World is entirely server-based. At a high level, the model is this. Clients dispatch controller inputs to the server, and then the server checks that input for limits that might invalidate that. Then, if it accepts the use, it is then input into a character, aka actor, is their internal name, with server memory. Physics and the game rules are then run entirely server-side, and then the outcome is sent back to the original client. Clients will then draw the outcome determined by the server. Take, for example, a player swinging an axe or chopping a tree. To the player, they hit a button and the axe swings, which might seem very client-based. What actually is happening is more complex. The player hits a button, a message is dispatched to the server that says, "I pressed a button for a swing," and then at the same time, the client starts drawing the visual of swinging the axe for the display. As part of this strictly graphical, and nothing to do with the simulation. The server doesn't even know about its graphical representation and hears no information other than the button press itself. Then the input reaches the server. It is also checked to see if it is possible. Then the server begins animating an entirely server-side version of the skeleton of the character with the swing. This is not an approximation or a bounding volume version of the skeleton. It's an actually full detailed being fully animated. So we can have a precision that if the axe is just barely grazes the tree, then it's consistent between the server and the client and it perceives as possible. If the result of this is entirely server-based animation is the axe intersects a tree, then the result is sent back to the client or a miss is sent back. It's important to note that only after a server has performed the animation that the results in the axe intersect a tree, and this is considered a success. We don't shortcut a roughly compute this. We do physics details such as actions, and upon receiving the outcome, either a hit or a miss, and the client will adjust its visual display to match what the server has determined. There are some client-side tricks that we use here to stretch the animation while the client is waiting for the server to answer, but the outcome is always based only on the server answer, and the same pattern applies in combat and other physics simulation interactions. We have a bug in which that if given certain circumstances where we were waiting for server-side on input and the client before processing through the outcomes, combined with an intentional weapon effect that allows for brief invulnerability. This created a situation where players could reach an invulnerable state and prolong it by making the client unresponsive. Even though the client has no say in damage, both damage the player creates and taken are computed server-side based off of the results of physics simulation plus the game rules. This was a particularly bad bug given our server-based simulation, and we apologize for that. We corrected the bug in code in the same day we learned about it, and then tested it to make sure nothing unintentionally came out of those changes, and we pushed the fix immediately after that. There are also obvious bugs that we are addressing in terms of rate limiting and controlling actions so that the fight seems playable frame rate wise. However, at no time are the clients making decisions or freezing characters in place. If characters are frozen, it is because the client is behind on drawing, but the server simulation still continues. So that is the kickoff. Let's continue on our journey here. Womb Crusher here. Womb Crusher. All right. Sorry, that tickled me. I didn't read their name before as I was preparing the video. Anyway, so they made a post explaining how things are verified server-side. However, I've come to issues with the post and would like to elaborate a bit for those less technically inclined. As we know, an MMO has to send data between the server and 1,000 of clients. No financially viable server can run thousands of those clients to actively simulate everybody playing the game. So what's the solution? The server needs the clients to perform their own calculations. I don't believe for a second Amazon actively simulates every action on their server, and you shouldn't either. A little bit of the information that a lot of people are overlooking is that no MMO, not even WoW, does this. Every single one of their offloads work to the clients, and to its extent, what you're referring to as a client-side authoritative. The difference between New World and, say, WoW or 14 is simply the rigidity of the sanity checks performed by the server. There were days of speed hacks, flying, no-clip model swaps, and all of this jazz, and even those monsters of the game. It takes time to develop. While I believe there are a lot of inexcusable bugs in New World, there is difficulty in preempting every action that needs to be verified by a less resource-intensive script server side. It is not as bad as some of the player base make it out to be. It just does not require an entire restructure of the game, nor is it as good as the official announcement paints it to. On a side note, my personal favorite bug is the regeneration perk ceasing to work when your food buff expires, because they set your regen to 0 instead of checking that the other buff gears are correctly to reduce it. Seriously, get someone on that. It should take a 15-minute fix tops. Thanks. I hope this clears things up. So now New World developers chiming in on this thread, giving us even more detail about how all this is playing out. So he says, from one software developer to another, hi. So I believe there are sincere in your understanding that this doesn't happen, but it actually does. Okay, so let me slightly qualify. There are areas of the world we don't care about precision in simulation very much, like your house. And generally, there are savings present in non-combat, non-physically interactive areas elsewhere. But in combat, in almost all situations, you are creating control inputs to a character that is fully simulated by the server. We don't even take action inputs from clients. We take the intent of the action. I press the button, for example. Even movement is server based. You might be able to see the effects of this. Your client can predict where it might go, and it sends that prediction to the server. But the server actually moves the character, or not, depending on how collision movement surface rules work out, and sends it back. Okay, you are here at X to the client. The client continuously interpopulating between its optimistically assumed position and it figures out what it asked as to go is valid versus what the server is telling it. And this is when this is out of sync, you will get yanked back to the server position when the client is too far out of place to interpopulate. This is commonly called rubber banding, and it occurs in other games too, but in our model, it is not the server doing the rough bound check on the client movement. It's the client learning that the server position of the character skeleton, which is the only one that matters. As your comment is, and this is unusual for even server-based games, but we want to build a model that was fundamentally resistant to some of the cheats that we see available in other games. One that would work for our style of skill-based combat where position and volume matters to second-to-second gameplay. You describe where it would require a large amount of CPU power, and it does. A typical single server of New World is actually a set of multiple EC2 instances that just out one of those instances has tens of virtual CPUs. It's a ton of CPU power, and anything I say further here will sound like a plug for AWS, so I'll just leave it at that. It does not prevent us from having bugs. Even one of the that's occasional that feels like cheats, but those can occur, and they aren't because the client isn't asserting some state of its server. It can, and we get them as soon as we know about them, sorted in priority because they are perceived impact to the gameplay. My personal favorite bug is the regeneration. And he says, noted. So it continues on. So the last patch broke a lot of stuff, Ice Gauntlet, Pillar of Fire, etc. So we are only able to particularly address this in an update. We aren't done working on preventing people from purposely cheating and creating lag in war. We just had to adjust how some of the AoE weapons worked, and that may have changed their feel and impact. We keep incrementing them until it's balanced, and certain AoE effects that we've created invisible server objects that players had to work on some of the interesting ways to load those up. We saw those thousands of objects being created in a minute in one example, even though they are invisible. That's somewhat equivalent to having thousands of NPCs pop out around you and causing problems. Shocking, or stacking, that's a different word that my brain perceived, in some AoE wasn't working as intended in the first place, and there are a lot of combinations that players find very creative ways to put them together. Edit because I hit save too soon. This specific AoE issue you mentioned are addressed in a patch targeted very soon, and after we finish testing them in high-intensity combat situations. So even if there were one thread per client, that would be 2,000 threads on an instance. You don't need one thread per client, though. And he says, indeed, you might completely hypothetically have a proof of threads that serve service actions from an actor on, and an actor is again like your representation on the server, on as a needed basis out of the pool in a steady rotation, which would allow a much smaller number of threads to handle a large number of actors. And then continuing on, since we were on this topic of AoE abilities, can we get some clarification on what the team's goal is on how AoE is supposed to work? The first 2 weeks, you were able to stack AoE, and then that got changed to only having one instance of it up. I'll see if I can get one of the player experience team folks in and on this to discuss. It's such a broad topic that if I tried to answer, I probably would make a mistake in describing it, which wouldn't help. I can say that there's always interest in combat being a skillful application, providing good situational awareness cues so that it can equally be encountered with a skill, aka don't stand and fire, and C, intuitive in function so it does the right thing when multiple effects overlap. So I guess we'll have to wait for more information on that. And then replying to Zekran, if you are indeed simulating the whole world, it seems like a big gameplay opportunity for an MMO. Is the plan to actually use the server simulation just for anti-cheat purposes? And he says the purpose was not solely to be resistant to hacking. No. Similar to you, we are interested in scale gameplay, which takes advantage of such systems as well. And we have ideas. Cannot wait to see what that looks like. So I think that catches us up. Let me just verify that before I kind of just bounce out and make sure there isn't another thread out there. Obviously, New World's still got lots of bugs. And like I said, and I'll continue to say, none of this is shocking at all. In fact, like all the biggest MMOs out there, especially today, have had probably worse launches. I would actually argue that they've had worse launches by far. But you can always feel free to disagree with me in that regards. I think essentially, like if you actually go look back and remember, then I think people kind of have that that aspect. Okay. Here we got a couple more. I don't know if it skipped over it or this is a different thread. There was a video of a guy jumping off a cliff when starting to drag around the game in the windowed mode. Then he started to float midair. I guess the server client communication stopped causing that. And he says, this class of bug is caused in some cases where we were waiting for client input to complete server actions. The solve for this, wildly simplified, is to not wait for those cases, but to just proceed. This doesn't mean that the client has control over the result of the actions. It just means that a particular server code allowed itself to be paced by an external input. As all the programmers on this thread would probably tell you, never trust external input or the lack of it in these cases. See here, and then that's the one software developer. I don't know why it skipped over that one when I was jumping in. Let me just make sure. That's strange. Okay, so whatever let's see here. Let's see if there's any other ones. All right, cool. We got plenty more here apparently. All right, let me just scroll up manually for a sec. Okay, there we go. The latest patch broke a lot of things. We covered that one. Jeez Louise, like what is up with your forums? All right, my question is, there's no client authority, then why are people frozen in air? And even other people's clients have someone jumps off a cliff, and that's this is more information on that. Okay, this is tied to this. Server authority isn't a solved all problems. It's just different, and I want to be careful to point that out, and I don't consider how some other games solve for authority as wrong. In contrast, they are just different approaches and have different pros and cons. You can make a bug on a server authority situation just like you can make it on a client directed situation, and we've had those in our case. They are disappointing, and we'll get to them as soon as possible, but I can tell you that these bugs listed in this thread aren't because the client generated a result and sent it to the server, although a couple of them certainly look like it, so I understand the confusion. That hopefully is some more information for you. Obviously, this is more discussion and information video. I appreciate you guys hanging out with me this entire time. Guys, if you're new here, my name's Brian. It's a whole different video. Thanks so much for watching, listening, being awesome. If you're a returning subscriber, you're a legend and you're attractive. That's all I can say about that. That's what you get for subscribing, by the way. Free compliments at the start of these or the end of these videos. And anyway, as we continue to follow New World and as they continue to fix the bugs, I continue to sit here and say, like, none of this to me is actually a real issue. The only issue that I see, it's kind of like the only time you fail is when you quit. In this case, the only issue I see is that if the devs stop responding, if the devs stop caring, if the devs don't put the work in. But I'm really loving the communication degree that I'm seeing. And honestly, like, I'm not going to sit here and like bemoan other YouTubers for doing what they do. It just feels like all of this is predicted. In fact, I predicted all of this back over the summer. It's like, that's just ultimately what's going to happen. I think it's just ultimately a lot of fear mongering that hopefully the devs can get done. Like, I don't want to sit here and like give anybody false hope. I just am looking forward to seeing what they do and what they fix. And yeah, if you're having problems with the game, just be sure to report it. My bias here is completely the fact that, like, I played 14 1.0 at launch and stuck with it. Like, WoW at launch was just god awful. And we tend to forget that because those games have been out so long and they've had so many, abilities to fix and patch and things like that. And it would be like obviously great to see a game launch without bugs, like an MMO. But MMOs are the most complicated games like on the planet, and yeah, it is how kind of it is. Hopefully they can get it worked out, but I don't know. Like, I'm just kind of tickled in a whole different way of just that this is exactly what was going to happen, because I feel so like validated in the fact that like this is exactly what I was said was going to happen, and it's happening because it happens with all of these things. It's just peak YouTube. It's just peak that aspect, and yeah, maybe that's a little bit frustrating to hear. And if they don't go and fix it, it's going to suck. Don't misunderstand me, but it is how it is. We're going to keep covering the information. We're going to keep playing the game, and hopefully you guys enjoy these videos. Oh, I know I'm going to get flamed for some of that. And the passion is real. Like, I empathize with, like, I'm wanting to play, I'm wanting to do the war, and I'm getting frustrated because of these bugs. I totally get it. And I totally empathize with you. I'm just more referring kind of the cycle of, like, the doomsaying and the fear mongering that I see, that it's like, oh no, another bug detected. The biggest fear, the biggest concern is that if people stop talking about the game, that's the real concern. If people stop talking about the game, even if they make, fear mongering videos and things like that. Anyway, guys, thanks for listening. Thanks for being here. You're awesome. Love you. See you soon. Bye.
I just want to say I'm really glad you're feeling better, and I love the videos. Well, I love you too. Michelle? Shoot for the moon, and so even if you fail, you'll reach the stars. Go for the 100K subscribers.